The bullet tore through Caleb Drummond's shoulder and spun him to the ground like a puppet with cut strings. Dust rose around his fallen body like a shroud, catching the moonlight and turning it amber. Blood spread dark beneath the Arizona stars, pooling in the cracks of dry earth, seeping into land that had drunk the blood of countless men before him. The woman standing above him stood nearly 6.5 feet tall. In the silver light, she looked like something from an older world, a warrior goddess descended from the mountains. The revolver in her hand still smoked, the barrel trembling slightly as she aimed at his chest. Her eyes, dark as obsidian, held no mercy, only a terrible, righteous fury. She could pull the trigger again. She could end everything. He was the enemy. He was the man who had killed her father, or so they both believed. But she did not fire. "You live," she said, her voice rough as gravel scraping stone. "Not because you deserve it." 2 weeks earlier, Caleb Drummond had not known this woman existed. 2 weeks earlier, he was simply a blacksmith with trembling hands, working through the night so no one could see his weakness, drinking whiskey to forget the faces that haunted his dreams. 2 weeks earlier, he had been slowly dying from the inside out, and he had not cared enough to stop it. This is the story of how he arrived at that moment beneath the gun, and why that bullet saved his life instead of taking it. The hammer fell against red-hot steel with a rhythm that had stopped being conscious thought years ago. Strike, turn, strike again. The metal sang its sharp protest, sparks scattering across the dirt floor of the forge like dying stars falling to earth. Caleb Drummond worked in near darkness, the only light coming from the glowing mouth of his furnace, and a single oil lamp swinging from a beam overhead. The lamp moved slightly in the night breeze, making shadows dance and twist across his face like memories he could not escape. It was 2 in the morning. The town of Copper Ridge slept, its dusty streets empty, its saloon finally quiet after the last drunk stumbled home. But Caleb could not sleep. He had not slept properly in 5 years. Sleep meant dreams. Dreams meant remembering. And remembering was a luxury he could not afford. At 36, he looked 50. His hair, once dark brown, hung past his shoulders in tangled waves streaked with premature gray. A wild beard covered the lower half of his face, hiding what had once been a clean military jaw, the kind of jaw that belonged on recruitment posters. His eyes, pale gray blue like winter ice over a frozen lake, held a permanent weariness that no amount of rest could cure. Those eyes had seen things. They remembered things. And sometimes, late at night when the work was done and silence pressed too close, those things came back with a clarity that made his hands shake so badly he had to grip the anvil just to stay standing. The shaking. That was why he worked at night. During daylight, when the town was awake and people might see, his hands trembled unless they gripped something solid. The hammer, the tongs, the reins of his horse. But in the darkness, with only the fire for company and the stars as witnesses, no one could see the betrayal of his own body. It had been this way since he walked away from Fort Apache in the middle of a January snowstorm 5 years ago. He had carried nothing but the clothes on his back, a canteen of water, and a sin so heavy it bent his spine with every step. He had expected to die in that storm. Part of him had hoped for it, but the blizzard had spit him out 3 days later, half frozen and completely changed, near a small mining town that asked no questions about a man's past. On a high shelf above his workbench, barely visible in the firelight, sat a small leather pouch, worn and stained from years of handling. Inside that pouch lay a silver necklace with a pendant shaped like an eagle, wings spread wide, talons extended as if reaching for prey. He had picked it up from blood-stained snow at a place called Black Canyon. He had never opened the pouch to look at it again. He could not bear to see the blood that might still stain the silver, but he also could not bring himself to throw it away. It was his penance, his reminder, his proof that he deserved every nightmare that visited him in the dark. The door to the forge creaked open. Caleb did not look up. He knew who it was by the heavy footfalls and the jingle of spurs. Sheriff Roy Whelan was 42 years old, thick around the middle from too many meals at the town's only restaurant, with a face weathered by sun and worry and secrets he had never shared. He had been a sergeant in the same cavalry unit as Caleb years ago, in another lifetime when they both wore blue and believed in the righteousness of their cause. They had saved each other's lives more than once in those days. Now Roy was the law in Copper Ridge, and Caleb was just a blacksmith who kept to himself and asked nothing of anyone. Roy stood in the doorway for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the dim interior. Then he walked over near the anvil and waited. He knew better than to interrupt Caleb mid-strike. Some lessons a man only needed to learn once. When the blade Caleb was working cooled enough to set aside, he finally raised his head. The movement was slow, reluctant, like a man surfacing from deep water. "Sheriff," his voice came out rough from disuse. He did not talk much these days. Words required energy he did not have. "Caleb." Roy reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. His hand hesitated for just a moment before extending it. "Got an order for you. Town council wants 30 sets of shackles and cuffs. Heavy duty. They need them in 2 weeks." Caleb stared at the paper without taking it. The firelight danced across its surface, making the official seal look like it was bleeding. "What for?" Roy's mouth tightened. Something flickered across his face. Guilt, perhaps, or shame. Territorial governor issued a directive. All Apache north of the Gila River are to be relocated to the reservation at San Carlos by end of October. That is 6 weeks from now. The town needs to be ready to process them when the army brings them through. Something cold settled in Caleb's gut, heavy as iron, sharp as the blade he had just been forging. Process them, chain them, load them on wagons like cattle. Send them south to a place where the water was poison and the land was dust and children died of diseases that should never have touched them. He knew how it worked. He had been part of operations like this before. He had followed orders. He had done his duty. And 7 people had died by his hand in a single morning, their blood staining the snow red while he watched through a rifle scope and told himself it was war. "You know the situation," Roy continued, his voice carefully neutral, but his eyes saying something else entirely. They would not quite meet Caleb's gaze. "The mining companies have been pushing hard. There is silver in those hills. Big deposits. The Apache are sitting on top of land worth millions, and some powerful people want them gone. Want them gone bad enough to pay whatever it costs." Caleb noticed that Roy's hands were not quite steady. There was tension in his shoulders, a tightness around his jaw that had nothing to do with the Apache or the mining companies. Something else weighed on the sheriff, something he was not saying. But before Caleb could ask, Roy was already handing him the paper, almost pushing it into his hands. "I will have them ready," Caleb said quietly. The words tasted like ash in his mouth, like betrayal, like everything he had tried to leave behind when he walked away from Fort Apache. Roy nodded, started to turn, then paused, his hand on the doorframe. He did not look back. "You are doing all right out here, Caleb. I know you keep to yourself, but winter is coming. Gets cold in this old building. Might be good to think about moving into town, finding steadier work, finding people to talk to instead of just that anvil." "I am fine." "You do not look fine. You look like a man trying to beat himself to death one hammer blow at a time." There was no judgment in Roy's voice, only a weary concern that seemed laced with something else, something that looked almost like guilt. But guilt about what? What could Roy Whelan possibly feel guilty about? Caleb met his eyes. "Maybe I am." Roy sighed. The sound was heavy with years of friendship and shared history and things that could never be unsaid. "Well, try not to succeed at it. This town needs a decent blacksmith." He tipped his hat. "And Caleb, if you ever want to talk about the old days, about what happened. I am here. You know that, right? Caleb did not answer. He just watched as Roy turned and left, the door swinging shut behind him with a soft thud that sounded strangely final. Alone again, Caleb stood motionless in the flickering light. 30 sets of shackles, 60 wrists that would be bound, 60 ankles that would be chained, families that would be separated, children who would cry for parents they might never see again. He walked over to his stock of iron bar and began calculating how much he would need. The math was simple. 2 bars per set, 60 bars total, plus the connecting chains, plus the locks. The math was simple. The implications were not. He thought of hands locked in those cuffs, brown hands, calloused hands, hands that had held children and built homes and planted corn in soil that their ancestors had worked for generations. Now those hands would wear iron forged by a man who had already taken too much from their people. He reached for the whiskey bottle on the high shelf, took a long pull, and felt the burn chase away nothing at all. The faces were still there. The screams were still echoing. The guilt was still crushing him with every breath. That night he did not sleep. Instead, he stoked the forge hotter than necessary, hot enough to sear flesh if he got too close, and began work on the first set of shackles. He told himself it was just iron, just work, just survival. But when dawn came pale and cold through the eastern window, painting the walls the color of old bone, he looked at what he had made and felt the weight of every link pressing down on his soul. The memory came as it always did, uninvited and brutal in its clarity, dragging him back 5 years as surely as if he had fallen through a hole in time. Black Canyon, January 1878. Snow falling thick and silent, blanketing the world in white. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, each inhale like swallowing broken glass. Caleb lay prone on a ridge, his rifle resting on a flat rock, his eye pressed to the scope. His breath fogged in the frigid air, each exhale a small ghost that rose and vanished. Beside him, Sergeant Martinez called targets in a bored monotone, his voice flat and emotionless, as if he were reading a grocery list instead of marking human beings for death. Third group from the left, the one carrying the child. Take him. Caleb adjusted his aim, his frozen fingers moving with practiced precision. Through the scope, magnified and impossibly clear, he could see the man. Not young, maybe 50, his face weathered and worn by decades of sun and wind and struggle. Gray streaked his black hair. Deep lines carved his cheeks. His eyes, even at this distance, held a desperate determination. The child on his back was small, perhaps 3 years old, maybe 4. Arms wrapped tight around the man's neck, a tiny face pressed against his shoulder, seeking warmth and safety. They were running toward a stand of cottonwoods where other Apache were gathering, trying to organize a defense against the soldiers who had appeared on the ridges like blue ghosts. The man was not a warrior. He carried no weapon. He wore no war paint. He was simply trying to get a child to safety. A grandfather, perhaps, or an uncle, or just a man who had seen a child alone and terrified and done what any decent human being would do. Take the shot, Drummond. Caleb's finger tightened on the trigger. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong. Shooting a man carrying a child was not war. It was murder, plain and simple. The kind of act that damned a soul for eternity. But the Army did not recognize such distinctions. An Apache was an Apache. A target was a target. Orders were orders. His finger would not move. Drummond, take the damn shot, now. And then the world exploded in sound and smoke. The rest of the line opened fire, a deafening roar that shattered the frozen silence. When the echoes faded and the smoke began to clear, Caleb looked through his scope and saw the man and child both down in the snow, red spreading beneath them, still and silent, gone. He did not know if he had pulled the trigger or not. The smoke had obscured his view. His ears rang from the gunfire all around him. He had been aiming, finger on the trigger, and then there was chaos, and then they were dead. 7 Apache died by his hand that day. 7 confirmed kills. He had the commendations to prove it, locked in a trunk somewhere in a storage room he never visited, never looked at. But the man with the child haunted him most, because he could not remember if he had fired or if he had frozen. The uncertainty was worse than guilt. At least guilt was certain, at least guilt had shape and weight. This not knowing was like being suspended over an abyss, never falling, never climbing out, just hanging there forever. The next morning, Caleb loaded a wagon with finished tools and hardware. A ranch up north near Ponderosa Ridge had ordered branding irons and miscellaneous smithing work. The pay was good, better than most jobs in this territory, and the ride would take him into high country, away from the stifling heat of the valley floor. He hitched his bay gelding, a sturdy animal named Smoke, who had been his only companion for 3 years, to the wagon and set out just after sunrise, when the air still held a hint of coolness and the sky was painted pink and gold. The road climbed steadily into the mountains, winding through stands of ponderosa pine that filled the air with their sweet vanilla scent, and scrub oak that rustled in the breeze like whispered secrets. The higher he went, the easier it became to breathe, not just physically, but something deeper. Up here, the world felt cleaner, somehow less contaminated by human sin. The sky was a deeper blue. The air tasted of pine and possibility instead of dust and regret. Hawks circled overhead, riding the thermals with effortless grace, their sharp eyes scanning the ground below for movement. Once he saw a small herd of mule deer watching him from a rocky outcrop, their large ears swiveling to track his passage, their brown eyes curious but unafraid. He stopped the wagon and watched them for a long moment, envying their simple existence. They did not carry guilt. They did not wake screaming in the night. They simply lived. He made the delivery by early afternoon, exchanged minimal pleasantries with the ranch foreman, a taciturn man who seemed to appreciate Caleb's similar disposition, and started back. He should have taken the main road. It was faster, safer, more traveled. But something in him wanted to delay his return to Copper Ridge, to the forge, to the pile of shackles waiting to be finished, to the whiskey and the nightmares and the endless cycle of guilt that never let him rest. So he took the old trail that cut through Red Canyon. The route was rougher and slower, barely more than a game path in places, but it offered solitude and a kind of raw beauty that sometimes quieted the voices in his head. Red walls of stone rising on either side like cathedral walls. The whisper of wind through ancient junipers. The distant cry of a red-tailed hawk. He was halfway through the canyon, lost in the strange peace of this wild place, when he heard the gunfire. It came from below and to the west, echoing off the rock walls like thunder. Rifle shots, irregular, panicked, the sound of people fighting for their lives. Then the sharper crack of military carbines, disciplined and methodical. The sound of professionals doing their deadly work. A running fight. Someone was being pursued. Every instinct told him to turn around, to get out of the area, to not get involved. Getting involved was how good intentions turned into nightmares. He had learned that lesson at Black Canyon, learned it in blood and screaming and faces that would never leave his memory. But something else, some stubborn remnant of the man he had been before the war taught him to hate himself, made him guide Smoke off the trail and up a rocky slope to a vantage point overlooking the canyon floor. What he saw made his blood run cold. 8 cavalry troopers in dust-covered blue uniforms were engaged in close-quarters combat with 3 Apache warriors. The battle was chaos, a swirling melee of horses and men, and the flash of weapons. The Apache were outnumbered, outgunned, and clearly losing. Even as Caleb watched, One warrior took a carbine round to the chest and went down hard, his body rolling limply down the slope like a discarded puppet. The remaining two fought with desperate ferocity, knowing they were dead men but refusing to go quietly. One fired arrows from behind a boulder, his movements swift and precise despite the carnage around him. The other, armed with a rifle that must have been taken from a dead soldier somewhere, provided covering fire from a different position. But it was the fourth figure that froze Caleb in place, that made his breath catch and his heart stop, and his hands gripped the reins so tight his knuckles went white. She stood nearly 6.5 feet tall, a giant among her people, a warrior from legend. Her shoulders were as broad as any man's, her arms corded with muscle that flexed and bunched as she swung a stone war club with devastating force. Her long black hair, matted with sweat and blood, streamed behind her as she moved with a speed that should have been impossible for someone of her size. She wore buckskin leggings and a simple tunic, both darkened with moisture and grime, and what could only be blood. An arrow protruded from her left shoulder, the shaft broken off short, a terrible wound that would have felled most men. Blood ran freely down her arm, dripping from her fingers, painting the rocks beneath her feet red. More blood stained her side where a bullet had grazed her ribs. She was magnificent and terrible, a warrior from an older age, from a time when giants walked the earth and gods still intervened in the affairs of mortals. And as Caleb watched, transfixed, she brought her club down on a trooper's skull with a sickening crack that echoed off the canyon walls like the sound of worlds ending. But there were too many. For every soldier she felled, two more closed in. She was bleeding from a dozen wounds now, her movement slowing, her breath coming in ragged gasps that Caleb could hear even from his hidden position above. The woman spun, deflecting a bayonet thrust with her forearm, but the movement cost her. Blood sprayed from the gash it opened in her flesh. Another soldier fired from 10 feet away, point-blank range that left no room for missing. The bullet took her high in the left side of her torso, spinning her half around. She staggered, went to one knee. Her club slipped from fingers that suddenly could not grip. The troopers closed in for the kill. Then something unexpected happened. A whistle, sharp and urgent, came from the ridge above. A signal, a warning. The soldiers looked up, saw something Caleb could not see from his position, and suddenly they were shouting to each other, pulling back, mounting horses that had been left further down the canyon. Reinforcements coming, or a trap, or something else entirely. In less than a minute they were gone, riding hard to the east, leaving their dead behind. 4 blue uniformed bodies sprawled on the rocks, and 3 Apache warriors who would never rise again. The 2 surviving Apache warriors vanished into the rocks like smoke, melting into the landscape as if they had never existed. But the woman, the giant, she tried to stand and could not. Her legs buckled. She collapsed onto her side, her breathing harsh and ragged, one hand pressed to the gunshot wound in her torso, the other still reaching for her fallen club. Caleb sat on his horse hidden among the scrub pine and watched her. His heart pounded against his ribs. His hands shook on the reins, trembling worse than they had in months. He should leave. He knew that with absolute certainty, the way he knew the sun would rise and men would die and guilt never truly faded. If he helped her and anyone found out, he would be marked as a traitor, hunted down, probably hanged from the nearest tree without trial. The army did not look kindly on those who aided the enemy. If he left her, she would die within hours. Blood loss would take her first, draining the life from her magnificent body drop by drop. If the blood loss did not kill her, exposure would when the cold mountain night set in. Either way, she would be dead by morning, and no one would ever know he had been here. The choice should have been simple, but then the woman turned her head, moving with visible effort, and her eyes met his across the distance. They were dark, almost black, burning with pain and rage and something else he could not name. Pride, perhaps, or defiance. She did not cry out. She did not beg. She did not even seem surprised that he was there. She simply looked at him, and in that look, he saw a recognition that chilled him to the bone. She knew what he was. She knew he was white, knew he was probably military or former military from the way he sat his horse, from the cut of his clothes, from 100 small details that warriors learn to read. She knew he was the enemy, and yet she did not look away. The moment stretched, became unbearable. The silence pressed down on them both like a physical weight. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. Smoke shifted nervously beneath him, sensing his rider's agitation. In his mind, unbidden and unwanted, came the memory. A canyon not unlike this one. Winter instead of fall. A man carrying a child through the snow. The scope, the trigger, the smoke. He dismounted before he knew he had made a decision. His feet hit the ground and suddenly he was moving, walking down the slope toward where the woman lay. He unbuckled his gun belt and hung it on the branch of a pine tree, well out of reach. Then he pulled off his hat and dropped it on the ground beside it. He was unarmed now, vulnerable. If she wanted to kill him, or if her people returned, he would die here in this canyon. Perhaps he deserved it. "I am not going to hurt you," he said quietly, knowing she probably did not understand English, but hoping his tone would convey his intent. "I want to help." She stared at him, breathing hard, each inhale a visible struggle. One hand reached for a knife at her belt, fingers scrabbling against the worn leather. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely grip the handle, but still she tried. Still she fought. Caleb stopped, held up his empty hands, showed her his palms, his fingers spread wide. "Let me help. Please." The woman's eyes narrowed. Her mouth moved, forming words in her own language, harsh and guttural sounds that he could not understand, but whose meaning was clear enough. She was telling him to stay back, to leave, to go to hell and take all white men with him. But then her strength gave out. The knife slipped from her fingers, clattering against the rocks. She sagged back against the boulder behind her, her eyes closing, then fluttering open again, fighting to stay conscious with every ounce of will she possessed. Blood pooled beneath her, dark and spreading, painting the rocks the color of rust. Caleb moved quickly. He knelt beside her, close enough now to see the details of her wounds, and his stomach clenched at what he saw. The arrow in her shoulder was barbed, the wicked point designed to tear flesh if someone tried to pull it out. It was embedded deep in the muscle, probably scraping against bone. The bullet wound in her side was bleeding freely, a through-and-through shot that had missed anything vital but would kill her by blood loss if not treated soon. He ran back to his wagon and grabbed his bedroll and the small medical kit he carried. Relics from his army days, from a time when he had believed in saving lives rather than taking them. When he returned, the woman was watching him again, her gaze tracking his every move with the intensity of a wounded predator sizing up a threat. "I am going to remove the arrow," he said, not because she could understand him, but because the silence was too heavy, and he needed to fill it with something other than the sound of her labored breathing. "It is going to hurt. I am sorry." He had done this before, more times than he cared to remember. Field medicine in combat conditions. You worked fast. You worked clean. You tried very hard not to think about the screaming. He pulled out a folding knife, heated the blade briefly with a match to sterilize it, then cut away the fabric around the arrow shaft. The wound was ugly, the flesh swollen and red, already showing signs of infection. The woman hissed through her teeth but did not cry out. Her jaw was clenched so tight he could see the muscles standing out like cords of rope. The arrowhead was buried deep. He had to cut around it, prying it loose a fraction of an inch at a time, while blood welled up hot and slick around his fingers. The smell of copper filled his nostrils, mixed with the sharper scent of infection. Her hand shot out and gripped his wrist. Her fingers were like steel bands despite her weakness, digging into his flesh hard enough to bruise. She stared at him with an expression he could not read. Pain, fury, and something else. Something that might have been curiosity. Her grip tightened until he thought the bones might crack. "I know," he whispered. "I know it hurts. I am sorry. I am so sorry." The arrowhead came free with a wet sound that made his stomach turn. He immediately packed the wound with clean cloth, applying pressure until the bleeding slowed to a trickle. The bullet wound was easier. Clean entry and exit. He flushed it with whiskey from his canteen, making her gasp and arch her back against the pain, then bandaged it tightly with strips torn from his own shirt. By the time he finished, the sun was low in the sky, painting the canyon walls orange and gold, making them look like they were on fire. The woman had not lost consciousness, but she was fading fast. Her eyes glazed over with shock and exhaustion. Her breathing had slowed to something shallow and irregular. Caleb knew he had to move her. The soldiers might return. Animals would come for the bodies, drawn by the scent of blood. This place was not safe. There was a shallow cave about 200 yards up the slope, barely more than an overhang of rock, but it would provide shelter and concealment. "Can you stand?" he asked. She looked at him, uncomprehending. He mimed standing, then pointed to the cave. She followed his gesture, seemed to understand, and nodded once. A sharp, jerky movement that cost her visible effort. Caleb got an arm under her shoulders and heaved. She was astonishingly heavy, pure muscle and bone, and it took everything he had to get her upright. She swayed, nearly fell, and he braced himself against her weight, his boots sliding on the loose rocks. Together, moving in awkward, stumbling steps that covered barely a foot at a time, they made their way up the slope. It took 20 minutes to cover 200 yards. By the time they reached the cave, Caleb was drenched in sweat despite the cooling air, and the woman was barely conscious, leaning on him so heavily he thought his knees would buckle. He lowered her carefully onto the cave floor, then collapsed beside her, gasping for breath, his muscles screaming. For a long time, neither of them moved. The cave was cool and dim, the light outside fading to purple dusk. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped and another answered. The evening chorus was beginning, nature continuing its ancient rhythms, regardless of human violence. The woman's breathing was slow and steady now, the edge of panic gone. She was going to live, probably, if infection did not set in. Caleb got a small fire going in the back of the cave using dry wood that would produce minimal smoke. He boiled water from his canteen, made weak broth from jerky and wild onions he found growing nearby, and coaxed the woman into drinking some of it. She did not speak, but she drank, and when he offered her his blanket, she took it without protest. Night came fully, and with it a cold that seeped into the bones. Caleb sat by the fire, feeding it small sticks, watching the woman sleep. In the firelight, her face was less fierce, more human. He could see the shape of her cheekbones, high and proud, the line of her jaw, strong but feminine, the way her lashes cast shadows on her cheeks, long and dark. She was young, he realized, maybe 25, maybe younger. Hard to tell with a life lived outdoors under constant threat. On her tunic, near the collar, he noticed something. Embroidery done in the Apache style with porcupine quills dyed red and black. The pattern caught the firelight and seemed to glow. He leaned closer, careful not to wake her. A stylized eagle, wings spread wide, talons extended. He had seen that pattern before, on a silver necklace, in a leather pouch, on a high shelf in his forge back in Copper Ridge. Caleb felt the world tilt beneath him. His hands began to shake. Not the usual tremor, but a violent shuddering that made his teeth chatter. He stood up abruptly, walked to the mouth of the cave, and stared out at the darkness. Stars were beginning to appear, distant and cold, indifferent to the turmoil below. The eagle was the mark of Nantan's bloodline. Nantan, the medicine man who had led a band of Apache through the Superstition Mountains for 2 decades, evading capture, teaching his people to survive on nothing, to fight with cunning rather than brute force. Nantan, who had been killed at a place called Black Canyon in the winter of 1878, the man carrying the child, the target he could not remember shooting. This woman was Nantan's daughter, and Caleb had carried her father's necklace in his pocket for 5 years, like a stone of guilt that he could never put down. He doubled over, bracing his hands on his knees, fighting the urge to vomit. Behind him, the woman stirred in her sleep, murmured something in her own language, and was quiet again. Caleb straightened slowly, forcing himself to breathe. To think. He should tell her. That was the right thing to do. To confess. To give her the chance to know who had destroyed her family. But the words stuck in his throat, bitter and cowardly. What would he even say? I think I might have killed your father. I am not sure, but there is a good chance, and I have carried his necklace for 5 years as a reminder of my sin. The hours crawled past. Caleb did not sleep. He sat by the dying fire staring at the woman and felt the weight of 5 years of running settle onto his shoulders like a yoke of lead. Dawn came gray and cold, painting the world in shades of ash. The woman woke slowly, blinking against the pale light that filtered into the cave. She sat up with a wince, testing her injuries with careful movements, and found them bandaged and stable. She looked at Caleb, and for the first time there was something other than hostility in her eyes. Confusion, perhaps. A weary curiosity. Caleb cleared his throat. How do you feel? She did not answer, but she touched the bandage on her shoulder, then the one on her side, as if confirming they were real. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a piece of hardtack, offering it to her. She took it cautiously, sniffed it, then bit into it with strong white teeth. They ate in silence, the fire reduced to embers, the morning birds beginning their song outside. After a while, the woman spoke. Her voice was deeper than he had expected, rough from pain or disuse or both. She said something in Apache, a string of words that meant nothing to him. Then she tried again, this time in halting English. Why you help? The question was simple. The answer was anything but. Caleb looked at her. This woman who was easily 6 inches taller than him, who could probably break him in half, even wounded, who had every reason to hate him on sight. He thought about lying, about making up some noble reason. But he had lied enough to himself and others. Because I owe your people a debt, he said quietly. Her eyes narrowed. White man owe nothing. White man take. I took, he admitted, more than I can ever give back. But maybe I can start by helping you. She studied him for a long moment, her gaze searching his face for deceit or weakness. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, or at least not alarm her, because she nodded slowly. You soldier, she said. It was not a question. Was, not anymore. Why not? Caleb looked down at his hands, at the scars and calluses, at the faint tremor that never quite went away. Because I could not do it anymore. The killing. The woman made a sound that might have been a laugh or a snort of derision. All white men kill, soldier or not. You are right, he said. We do. They sat in silence for a while longer. Then the woman said, What name? Caleb Drummond. Caleb, she repeated, testing the sound. Then she pointed to herself. Kaya. Kaya. He echoed it. The name meant something, he thought, but he did not know what. She touched the embroidery on her tunic, the eagle symbol, and said something in Apache that he did not catch. But he understood anyway. She was telling him who she was, where she came from. She was Nantan's daughter, confirmation of what he had feared. His heart hammered against his ribs. The moment had come. He could tell her now. He could lay the truth at her feet and accept whatever judgment she delivered. But before he could decide, Kaya spoke again. You take me home. Home. To her people. Wherever they were hiding in these mountains. To safety. To her family. It was a simple request. It was also suicide. If he walked into an Apache camp, they would kill him on sight. White skin or no. Good intentions or no. But looking at her, at the way she held herself despite the pain, at the fierce pride in her eyes even now, he found himself nodding. Yes, he said, I will take you home. They traveled slowly, keeping to game trails and avoiding the main roads. At night they made cold camps with no fires to give away their position. Kaya did not speak much, and when she did, it was in short, clipped sentences. How far to water, when to rest, whether the high ridge or the low valley was safer. But on the second night, as they sat in the darkness under a sky thick with stars, she broke the pattern. You say you owe debt, she said. What debt? Caleb had been dreading this question. He stared up at the Milky Way, a river of light across the void, and tried to find words that would not sound like excuses. I was a soldier, he began, a sharpshooter, sniper. My job was to kill from a distance. People who never saw me coming, I was good at it, too good. He paused, swallowed hard. In the winter of 1878, my unit was sent to stop a group of Apache who had left the reservation. We found them in a place called Black Canyon. Beside him, Kaya went very still. He could feel the weight of her attention, sharp and focused. We were told they were hostile, that they were raiding settlements, killing settlers. We were told to stop them by any means necessary. His voice cracked. So we did. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the insects seemed to have stopped chirping. Black Canyon, Kaya said finally, her voice flat and hard. My father died there. Caleb closed his eyes. There it was. The truth spoken aloud. Irrevocable. Nantan was your father, he said, not a question. Yes. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Sorry not bring him back. No, it does not. Kaya turned to look at him, and in the starlight her face was a mask of stone. You kill him! The question hung between them, terrible in its simplicity. Caleb thought about lying, about claiming he did not know, could not be sure. But he had lied enough, and this woman deserved better. I do not know, he said honestly. There was a man carrying a child, running toward cover. My spotter called the target. I was aiming. There was smoke, confusion. I thought I hit him, but I never confirmed it. I was already moving to the next target. He looked at her directly. But even if I did not pull the trigger that killed him, I was there. I was part of it. I helped make it happen. So yes, I am responsible. Kaya was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. My father was medicine man, healer. He not fight. He run because soldiers come to reservation. Say all Apache must go to new place. Bad place. No water. No food. He take the sick ones. The children who could not walk far. And he run. Try to hide in mountains until winter pass. He was trying to save them, Caleb said. Yes, and you kill him for it. There was no accusation in her tone, no anger, just a flat statement of fact. Caleb stood up, unable to sit still any longer. He walked a few paces away, his hands clenched into fists. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the leather pouch, the one he had carried for 5 years. He opened it, and by starlight he could just make out the glint of silver, the necklace, the eagle. He walked back to Kaya and held it out to her. She took it. Her fingers trembled as they closed around the familiar metal. She stared at it, then raised her eyes to his face. This is his, she said. My father's. I make it for him when I am 12 years old. I know. I kept it. I thought maybe someday I could return it. Kaya clutched the necklace to her chest, and for the first time since he had met her, her iron control cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks, silent and terrible, and the sight of it broke something in Caleb that he had not known was still whole. I thought I could run from it, he said. From what I did. I left the army, left everything. But it follows me. Every night I see their faces. Kaya wiped her eyes roughly. She looked at Caleb, really looked at him. You hate yourself, she said. Yes. Good. You should. She stood up and walked to where he had left his gun belt. She drew his revolver, checked that it was loaded, and walked back to stand in front of him. She pressed the gun into his hand. Then she placed his hand against her chest, over her heart. Shoot me, she said. Caleb stared at her, horrified. What? No. You owe me death for death. My father for my life. Shoot me and debt is paid. Kaya, I cannot. Then you are coward. You want forgiveness without price. That is not how it works. I do not want to die, Caleb said, his voice breaking, and I do not want you to die. I want to fix this. You cannot fix, Kaya shouted. My father is dead. My mother is dead. My little sister is dead. You cannot fix that with sorry. Caleb let the gun drop. It fell to the ground between them. He sank to his knees, his head bowed, and he wept. Great racking sobs that tore through him, years of guilt pouring out in ugly choking gasps. Kaya stood over him, watching, her own tears still wet on her face. After a long moment, she knelt beside him. She did not touch him. She just knelt there, and together they cried for everything that had been lost. When the tears finally subsided, Kaya spoke again. Her voice was gentler now. Why you save me? In Canyon. You could ride away. Why you help? Caleb wiped his face with his sleeve. Because I could not let another one die. Not if I could stop it. I thought maybe if I saved one life, it might balance just a little bit against all the ones I took. Kaya picked up the gun. She emptied the chambers, letting the bullets fall into the dirt, and handed the empty revolver back to him. I not kill you, she said, not because you deserve to live, but because my father teach me something. He say revenge is fire that burn everything, even the person who light it. I do not deserve your mercy, Caleb said. No, Kaya agreed, but I not give mercy for you. I give it for me, so I can sleep at night. On the afternoon of the second day, Kaya stopped to rest beneath a stand of cottonwood trees near a small stream. The sound of water over rocks was soothing, a constant murmur that seemed to wash away some of the tension between them. Caleb had been practicing with the bow Kaya had taken from one of the fallen warriors. His hands shook too badly to hold a rifle steady, but the bow felt different. There was no explosive sound, no smell of gunpowder, no flash of memory with each shot, but his arrows still flew wild. His fifth attempt missed the trunk of a pine tree by several feet, disappearing into the brush with a rustle that sent a rabbit fleeing. Kaya watched him miss for the sixth time. Then she stood, wincing slightly as her wounds pulled, and walked over to stand behind him. You stand wrong, she said. Before he could respond, she moved closer. Her hand touched his elbow, adjusting the angle of his arm. Her palm was warm despite the cool afternoon air, calloused from years of labor, but surprisingly gentle. Caleb stopped breathing. Breathe, Kaya said, her voice close to his ear. Bow not shoot with hand. Shoot with breath. She placed her other hand on his chest, directly over his heart. He could feel the weight of her fingers through his shirt, could feel his own heartbeat, suddenly loud and rapid. When heart beats slow, she continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. When breath go all out, that is when you release string. He was acutely aware of her proximity, the heat of her body behind him, the scent of sage and wood smoke that clung to her hair. the steady pressure of her hand against his chest. He drew the bow, held the tension, felt his heartbeat slow, matching the rhythm of her breathing behind him. Released. The arrow flew straight and true, embedding itself in the center of the pine trunk 30 yards away with a solid thunk. Good, Kaya said, and stepped back as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. They both knew it. That evening, as they sat on opposite sides of their small camp, Caleb caught Kaya looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. Not hostility, not trust either. Something in between. Something new. He found himself thinking about the weight of her hand on his chest long after darkness fell. Found himself wondering what it would be like to feel that weight again. Found himself, for the first time in 5 years, thinking about something other than guilt. That night, as they lay on opposite sides of the camp, Kaya spoke into the darkness. You want to die? It was not a question. Sometimes, Caleb admitted, I see it in your eyes. You punish yourself every day, with work, with whiskey, with silence. Yes. Why not just end it? Because I am a coward. Silence stretched between them. Then Kaya sat up. She reached for the revolver that lay between them, the one she had emptied the night before. But now Caleb saw that she had reloaded it. She stood and walked to him, pointed the gun at his chest. I give you what you want, she said. You want to die for what you did. Here is chance. Caleb looked up at her, at the gun, at her face half-shadowed, half-lit by moonlight. He should be afraid, but he was not. Go ahead, he said quietly. Kaya's hand trembled slightly. You not even fight. You just accept. What is there to fight for? Something flickered across her face. Anger, frustration, and beneath it, something that might have been grief. No, she said. That is too easy. She adjusted her aim, moved the barrel from his heart to his shoulder, and fired. The bullet tore through his left shoulder, spinning him onto his back. Pain exploded through his body, white-hot and blinding. He gasped, clutching the wound, blood seeping between his fingers. Kaya stood over him, the gun still smoking. Now you live, she said, her voice cracking. Now you carry this wound like I carry mine. Every time you feel pain, you remember, because dying is not payment. Living is. She dropped the gun and walked away into the darkness. Caleb lay in the dirt, blood soaking into the earth beneath him, and stared up at the stars through a haze of agony. She had shot him. She had chosen the shoulder, not the heart, punishment, not release. And somehow, in that moment of searing agony, he understood. This was her forgiveness, not absolution, not mercy, but a chance, a way forward that did not end in a grave. He heard footsteps returning, felt hands, gentle now, pressing cloth against the wound. Heard her voice, softer than he had ever heard it, murmuring words in Apache. She bandaged him through the night. And when dawn broke, they sat together in the pale light, both wounded, both bleeding, bound now by pain that went both ways. I could have killed you, Kaya said. I know. I wanted to. I know. But then you would be free, and I would be empty. Caleb looked at her, at this woman who had shot him and then saved him. What happens now, he asked. Now we go to my people. You tell them what is coming. They will kill me. Maybe. My brother wants to. But I will speak for you. They reached the border of Sleeping Rock Valley on the afternoon of the third day. Kaya stopped the wagon at the mouth of a narrow canyon. From here I go alone, she said. I thought I was taking you home. You did. This is border of our land. If you go further, my people kill you before I can explain. She climbed down from the wagon. You saved my life, Caleb Drummond. I not let them take yours. She reached out and placed her hand briefly on his wounded shoulder. The contact was fleeting but solid. We meet again, she said. It was not a question. How can you be sure? Because you owe me, and you said you want to make right. Then she turned and walked into the canyon, her tall frame disappearing into the shadows. Caleb sat alone in the wagon for a long time, watching the place where she had vanished. Then he turned smoke around and started the long journey back. The town of Copper Ridge looked different when Caleb returned, or perhaps it was he who had changed. Sheriff Roy Whelan found him at the forge that evening. "You look like hell," Roy observed. "Feel worse. Where have you been?" "Got delayed. Wagon trouble." Roy was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You hear about what is happening at the territorial capital?" "No." Governor Ashford announced the relocation date, October 15th, 3 weeks from now. Army is mobilizing. They are not just relocating families, Caleb. They are hunting down anyone who resists. Shoot on sight orders. Caleb felt his stomach drop. That is not relocation. That is extermination. That is politics. Clayton Mercer has been lobbying the governor for months. There is silver under Sleeping Rock Valley. Big deposits. Mercer wants the Apache gone. You have to stop this. Roy laughed bitterly. I am a county sheriff. What exactly do you think I can do? Caleb had no answer. Roy watched him for a moment. Then he shook his head and turned to leave. But at the door he stopped. Caleb, there is something I should have told you. Years ago, something about Black Canyon. Caleb's heart lurched. What about it? Roy stood there for a long moment. Then he shook his head. Nothing. Forget I said anything. He left without another word. That night Caleb did not sleep. He lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling, doing calculations in his head. 3 weeks, maybe 100 soldiers. Against how many Apache? He thought about what Kaya had said. You cannot fix past, but maybe you can do something about now. The idea came to him slowly. It was dangerous, probably suicidal, but it was something. 2 days later, Caleb rode to Silverton. He sent a telegram to a contact in the territorial governor's office, a man who owed him a favor. The response came 3 days later. Orders are suppression, not relocation. Mining company paid for results. Command expects casualties. Get out of the area. This is not your fight anymore. Caleb burned the telegram. Not his fight. He was wrong about that. He worked through the night, not on shackles, on something else. By morning, he had a plan. The journey back to Sleeping Rock Valley took 2 days. He almost made it to the canyon mouth before the arrow appeared, embedding itself 2 inches from his left boot. A figure dropped from a rock ledge above him, a man in his early 30s, tall, scarred. A fresh scar ran down his face from temple to jaw. He had a rifle pointed at Caleb's chest. White man does not have friends here, the man said. I helped Kaya after the fight in Red Canyon. She told us. She also told us you might have killed our father. Caleb's breath caught. This was Tonto, Kaya's brother. I was there, Caleb admitted, at Black Canyon. I am guilty. Then why should I not kill you now? Because I have information about the army, about what is coming. Something passed between them. Then Tonto whistled. 3 more warriors emerged from concealment. Walk, he commanded. Any wrong move, you die. They took him through a series of switchbacks into a hidden valley. Perhaps 50 people total, maybe 30 capable of fighting, against 100 soldiers. Kaya saw him before he saw her. She was carrying water from the spring. When she spotted Caleb being escorted at gunpoint, she set the vessel down and strode over. Why are you here? I have information. The army's not coming to relocate you. They are coming to wipe you out. October 15th, for 3 weeks. Tonto spat on the ground. We already know this. Do you know about the mining company? About why they want you dead? That got their attention. Caleb told them about Clayton Mercer, about the silver deposit, about the hired guns. When he finished, Tonto spoke first. So they will kill us for rocks in the ground. Yes, and you come here to warn us. I came here because I have a plan, a way to stop this without everyone dying. Caleb took a breath. There is a town called Cedar Springs, 40 miles west. It has a newspaper, a telegraph office, and a circuit judge who arrives on October 10th. He pointed to his rough map. If you can surrender to the judge instead of the army, in front of reporters and townspeople, then Mercer cannot touch you. The law, Tano said with contempt. White man's law that has never protected us. But it might protect you if everyone is watching. Kaya was studying the map. 40 miles through territory patrolled by Army and Mercer's men, with elders, children, wounded. How do we make that journey without being caught? I will guide you. I know the patrol routes. Why? Tano demanded. Why do you do this? Because I am done watching people die when I could do something to stop it. Tano looked ready to argue, but Kaya placed a hand on his arm. Brother, we need to talk alone. They withdrew to one of the wiki-ups. The conversation went on for nearly an hour. When they emerged, Kaya's face was set in grim determination. We will try your plan, she said, but if this is a trick, I will kill you myself. Understood. And you will stay here with our people until we reach Cedar Springs. You will be our prisoner. All right. We leave in 3 days. Those 3 days were the strangest of Caleb's life. He was given food and water, treated with wary courtesy, but never allowed to be alone. During the day, he helped where he was allowed, carrying water, gathering firewood. The children watched him with wide eyes. One small boy, perhaps 6 years old, eventually worked up the courage to approach. He stared up at Caleb, then touched his pale skin with one finger. Careful, Caleb said gently. I might be contagious. The boy giggled and ran back to his mother. On the second day, an old woman approached him. She was tiny, wizened, her eyes sharp as obsidian. She wanted to see his shoulder wound. Caleb removed his shirt. The old woman examined the bullet hole, then made a disapproving sound. She returned with a paste that smelled of sage. She packed it into the wound and wrapped it with clean cloth. That night, Kaya found him at the edge of the valley. Come, she said, walk with me. They walked in silence to where the spring emerged from the rocks. My scouts confirm your information, she said. The patrol routes are where you said. I have lied enough. I am trying to stop. She was quiet for a while. My brother wants to kill you. Many others do too. What do you say? I say I do not know. You confuse me, Caleb Drummond. I do not understand myself, Caleb admitted. The old woman who treated your wound, Kaya said. Her name is Neshoba. Her son was one of the 7 you killed. Caleb felt his stomach drop. She knows this? I told her. Then why did she help me? Because she believes healing is stronger than hate. They sat in silence. Can I ask you something? Caleb said. Yes. That night, when you shot me, why did you miss? Kaya laughed, a short, bitter sound. You think I miss? I am best shot among our people. Then why? She looked at him. Because when I looked at you, I saw something. Not a soldier, not an enemy, just a broken man, like me. I wish you had killed me, Caleb said softly. Yes, Kaya agreed, but easy is not the same as right. Kaya, what does your name mean? She looked surprised. It means little one. My father gave it to me as a joke when I was born. I was the smallest baby anyone had seen. Then I grew. A faint smile touched her lips. He used to laugh about it. He sounds like he was a good man. He was the best man, which is why they killed him. The journey began on the 4th day, just before dawn. The entire camp was struck in less than 2 hours. Wiki-ups collapsed and packed. Supplies loaded onto travois. Caleb found himself walking in the middle of the column, surrounded by warriors who kept their weapons ready. They moved through country that seemed impassable, following game trails and dry washes. On the second day, they nearly ran into an army patrol. Scouts spotted the blue uniforms from a mile away. The entire column melted into a rocky ravine. Children hushed with gentle hands over mouths. Horses quieted with knowing touches. Caleb lay pressed against the stone, hardly daring to breathe, as 12 cavalry troopers rode past less than 100 yards away. "Damn waste of time," one soldier was saying. "Apache are probably in Mexico by now." Their voices faded. The column waited another hour before moving. That night they camped in a box canyon with a single narrow entrance. Caleb sat by a small fire when a shadow fell across him. It was the boy who had touched his skin days before. He held something in his hands. A small carving, a horse made from pine wood. "For me?" Caleb asked. The boy nodded. "Thank you. It is beautiful." The boy smiled and ran back to his mother. On the fourth day, disaster struck. They were crossing an exposed ridge when shots rang out. Mercer's hired guns. 8 of them. Their first volley killed 2 horses and wounded an elderly man. The Apache warriors responded instantly, returning fire and rushing the wounded to cover. Caleb found himself pressed behind a boulder next to Kaya. "How many?" she shouted over the gunfire. 8, maybe 10. Kaya swore. "We cannot stay here." Tano crawled over. "We need to break contact." "Too many will die in the retreat," Kaya said. "More will die if we stay," Tano countered. Caleb looked at the hired gun's position, range, wind, angle. "Give me a bow," he said. Tano stared at him. "What?" "I can take them out. 3, maybe 4, before they realize where the arrows are coming from." "You cannot hold a rifle steady?" Kaya said. "Not a rifle, but a bow maybe." Tonto handed him the bow. "Do not miss," he said. Caleb knocked an arrow. The bow felt different from a rifle, more organic. His hands were steadier than they had been with any gun in 5 years. He rose slightly, drew, aimed, released. The arrow took the first man in the chest. Before his companions could react, Caleb had knocked and released again. The second arrow missed. The third took another man in the shoulder. Now the hired guns were scrambling. "Now!" Kaya shouted. "Everyone move!" The retreat was orderly despite the chaos. Caleb was the last to leave, walking backward. Bow ready, a bullet creased his leg. Another clipped his ear, but he kept moving. They regrouped an hour later. 2 dead, 5 wounded, but everyone else accounted for. Kaya found Caleb sitting against a rock, trying to bandage his leg. "Let me," she said. Her touch was gentle. "Where did you learn to shoot a bow?" she asked. "I did not. I just tried." "You saved lives today." "I took lives too." "They were trying to kill children. Do not waste guilt on them." She stood. "My brother says you fight like Apache now." "Tell him I am honored." "Caleb, when this is over, what will you do?" "I do not know." "Think about it, because you cannot go back to what you were. That man is dead." That night, Caleb walked the perimeter of the camp when he encountered Neshoba. The old medicine woman was sitting on a flat rock, grinding herbs. She looked up and gestured for him to sit. She spoke in Apache, a younger woman translated. "She says you have death inside you, but also life. These things are at war in your spirit." "She is right," more Apache. "She says her son, the one you killed. His name was Kaleo. He was 23 years old. He liked to sing and to make his daughter laugh." Caleb felt tears burning his eyes. "I am sorry. I am so sorry." More Apache. "She says sorry is a word. What matters is what you do with your life now. You can carry the death until it poisons everything, or you can use it to protect life instead of taking it." Neshoba placed her small hand on Caleb's head, murmuring something that sounded like a blessing. Then she stood and walked away. Caleb sat there for a long time, feeling something shift inside him. Not forgiveness, but permission to try to be better. 2 days later, battered and exhausted, they saw Cedar Springs in the distance. They made camp in the hills outside town as the sun set. Kaya, Tonto, and Caleb approached on foot under cover of darkness. "Tomorrow morning," Kaya said, "we walk in together. Families first, warriors last." "That is why Caleb goes first," she continued. "You go in tonight. Talk to the judge. Make sure he is ready." Caleb nodded. "I will do it." "If you betray us now," Tonto said quietly, "I will hunt you to the ends of the earth." "I know." Kaya placed a hand on Caleb's arm. "Be careful. And Caleb, thank you." He slipped into town as midnight approached. Getting the judge to listen without calling for help was harder than getting inside. Judge Harlan Whitmore was in his 60s, silver-haired and dignified. When Caleb knocked on his door at 2 in the morning, he answered with a derringer in his hand. "Sir," Caleb said quickly, hands raised, "my name is Caleb Drummond. I need 5 minutes of your time." Something in Caleb's face convinced him. Whitmore stepped aside. "Talk fast." Caleb told him everything. When he finished, Whitmore sat down heavily. "You are asking me to involve myself in a military matter. You are a judge. Your job is to uphold the law. These people have committed no crime." Whitmore was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "When do they arrive?" "Dawn. I will be there. But if this goes wrong, we are both going to hang." "I know, sir. Thank you." Dawn came cold and clear. Caleb stood on the courthouse steps with Judge Whitmore. The judge had roused the newspaper editor, Margaret Holloway, and the telegraph operator. Then they came. Kaya led the way, walking tall and proud despite her injuries. Behind her came the families, mothers carrying children, elders supporting each other. They walked down the main street of Cedar Springs in the early morning light. People emerged from houses and shops. Staring in shock, someone shouted for the sheriff, but Kaya did not stop. She walked straight to the courthouse steps. "My name is Kaya, daughter of Nantan. These are my people. We come not to fight, but to seek justice." Judge Whitmore stepped forward. "As circuit judge for this territory, I hereby take these individuals into protective custody. Any attempt to harm them will be considered an assault on the court itself." The crowd reacted loudly, some supportive, many angry, but Margaret Holloway was writing furiously, and the telegraph operator was already heading to his office. Then 20 riders appeared at the far end of the street. Mercers hired guns. Leading them was Jack Brennan, wanted in 3 territories for murder. The riders pulled up in front of the courthouse. Brennan dismounted with casual arrogance. "Judge Whitmore, I have orders from Clayton Mercer to take custody of these hostiles. These individuals are under the protection of this court. You have no authority here." "I have all the authority I need." Brennan patted his gun. Another group of riders appeared, blue uniforms. Captain Reynolds led 30 cavalry troopers. "I have orders to take custody of the Apache hostiles," Reynolds announced. "They are not hostiles," Whitmore said firmly. "They are asylum seekers. With respect, Your Honor, you do not have jurisdiction over military matters." "Show me the warrant." Reynolds hesitated. "It is a military order." "Then you have no standing in my court." Margaret Holloway stepped forward. "Captain Reynolds, are you confirming that you intend to remove individuals from legal custody without due process?" Reynolds's jaw tightened. The presence of the press changed the equation. "I will need to consult with my superiors," he said finally. That night, Caleb walked the perimeter of the courthouse when a figure emerged from the shadows. Sheriff Roy Whelan. Caleb's hand went to his gun, but Roy held up his empty hands. "Easy. I am not here to fight." "Then why are you here?" Roy looked exhausted, haunted. "I have been following you since you left Copper Ridge. There is something you need to know." He pulled out a weather journal. "This belonged to Sergeant Martinez. He died 2 months ago, but before he died, he wrote this." Caleb read by moonlight. I cannot carry it anymore. Black Canyon, the man with the child. Drummond did not shoot. He hesitated. His finger was on the trigger, but he did not pull it. I saw it through my scope, so I took the shot, and I told him it was his. I am sorry, Caleb, but there was more, and I was not the only one. Roy Whelan, he was there too. He knew what I did. He helped cover it up, because Mercer was already paying us. Caleb stared at the pages. You knew, he whispered. All this time, you knew I did not kill Nantan. Yes. Roy's voice broke. I let you carry that guilt for 5 years, because if the truth came out, I would lose everything. And there is more. 3 months ago, Clayton Mercer paid me $500 to make sure Sleeping Rock Valley was cleared out. I took the money. Caleb's fist connected with Roy's jaw. Roy went down hard. He did not try to defend himself. I deserve that, he said from the ground. Why are you telling me this now? Roy sat up slowly. Because tomorrow I am going to stand in that courtroom and tell the truth. About Black Canyon, about Martinez, about Mercer paying me off. He pulled an envelope from his coat. This is a letter from Mercer with his signature, describing the methods he wanted used. Caleb took the envelope slowly. You know what this means. You will lose everything. I already lost everything that mattered, the day I let Martinez take that shot and blamed it on you. He turned to leave. Roy, the sheriff stopped. Why did you let me believe it? All these years? Roy was quiet for a long moment. Because you wanted to believe it. Because you hated yourself so much. You needed a reason. He walked away into the darkness. Caleb stood alone, holding the envelope. He had not killed Nantan. The knowledge should have lifted a weight from his shoulders. Instead, he felt only a hollow emptiness. Because Roy was right. He had needed to believe it. The hearing began at 9 the next morning. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Journalists from as far away as San Francisco had arrived overnight. Soldiers lined one side of the room, Mercer's hired guns the other. Judge Whitmore banged his gavel 3 times. This court is now in session. Kaya stood. My name is Kaya, daughter of Nantan. I speak for my people. She described the conditions at the San Carlos reservation. Water contaminated, food rations cut, children dying from preventable diseases. Tonto spoke about the ambush on the ridge. Neshoba described losing her grandson at San Carlos. Then Judge Whitmore called Caleb Drummond. Caleb walked to the front and placed his hand on the Bible. I was a soldier, a sharpshooter. In the winter of 1878, my unit was sent to stop a group of Apache. We found them at Black Canyon. We were told they were hostile. We were told to stop them by any means necessary. His voice cracked. So we did. He paused. I believe for 5 years that I personally killed 7 people that day, including a man named Nantan. You believed? I recently learned that I was wrong. The shot that killed Nantan was fired by Sergeant Martinez, who let me take the blame. Do you have evidence? I have Martinez's journal and testimony from Sheriff Roy Whelan. Roy was sworn in. He told about Martinez taking the shot, about letting Caleb believe he was guilty, and then he told about Clayton Mercer. 3 months ago, Mercer offered me $500 to ensure that Sleeping Rock Valley was cleared out. I took the money. He pulled out the envelope. This is a letter from Mercer describing the methods he wanted used. Mercer was on his feet, face purple with rage. This is a conspiracy. That letter is a forgery. The letter was sent through the Cedar Springs post office, Roy said. The postmaster can confirm. Mr. Mercer, Whitmore's voice was ice. You are now called to testify. The questioning that followed was brutal. And finally Mercer broke. You do not understand. That silver deposit could transform this territory. It could bring railroads, factories, jobs for thousands of people. He was panting now. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made. Sometimes you have to clear away the old to make room for the new. That is how progress works. The courtroom had gone silent. Whitmore leaned forward. Mr. Mercer, you have just confessed that you believe indigenous peoples have no right to their ancestral lands. You have admitted that you hired armed men to force them out. He let the words hang. Mr. Mercer, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. As Mercer was led away in chains, the courtroom erupted with noise. Whitmore hammered his gavel. Order! I will have order! When the room finally quieted, he continued. This court finds that the Apache people have legitimate grounds for asylum. They are granted provisional asylum pending resolution of their land claims. He looked at Captain Reynolds. Captain, I am recommending that the Army conduct an investigation into Black Canyon. Reynolds stood stiffly. Military operations are not subject to civilian judicial review. When military operations result in the deaths of civilians, Captain, they absolutely are. The threat hung in the air. Reynolds sat back down, defeated. Whitmore banged his gavel. Court is adjourned. That night, Caleb found himself on the courthouse steps. Kaya found him there. It is over, she said. For now, Caleb replied. There will be appeals. But we are alive, and the world knows what they tried to do. She sat down beside him. You did not kill my father, she said quietly. No. How does it feel? Strange. For 5 years, that guilt was everything I was. Then maybe it is time to find out who you are without it. She was silent for a moment. You saved us, Caleb Drummond. You risked everything. You are not my enemies. We were. Once. That was a different man. Kaya turned to look at him. When this is truly over, what will you do? I do not know. Go back to the forge, I suppose. Alone? The question hung between them. I do not have to be alone, Caleb said slowly. If there was someone who wanted to stay. Kaya smiled. I am the tallest person you have ever met. I shot you. I have every reason to hate everything you represent. Yes. And you still want me to stay? More than I have wanted anything in 5 years. She reached out and took his hand. My father used to say that the strongest bridges are built between opposite shores. She squeezed his hand. I think I would like to build a bridge with you, Caleb Drummond. He pulled out the eagle necklace, the one Kaya now wore around her neck. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, and I think he would have approved of you. They sat together as the stars wheeled overhead. The future was uncertain. Challenges remained. But in this moment with Kaya beside him, Caleb allowed himself to believe that maybe redemption was possible. The cabin sat on a ridge overlooking Sleeping Rock Valley. It was positioned on the boundary between Apache land and the territory open to settlement, built half in the Apache style and half in the white settler style. Caleb stood on the porch, watching the sun set. His hands were steady now. The trembling had not disappeared entirely, but it no longer controlled him. Beside him, Kaya sat in a rocking chair. Her hands rested on her swollen belly. 8 months pregnant. Do you think it will be tall like me or short like you? She asked. I am hoping for somewhere in between, Caleb replied. Tall enough to reach high shelves, but short enough to fit through doorways. She laughed. In the valley below, smoke rose from the Apache camp. They had stayed in Sleeping Rock after the trial. The silver was still there, untouched. Mercer was in prison. Tonto rode up the trail. He dismounted and climbed the porch steps. The council wants you to speak tomorrow, Tonto said, about the new school. Caleb and Kaya were building a school, a place where Apache and white children could learn together. I will be there, Caleb said. Tonto nodded, started to leave, then paused. My sister chose well, he said. You are not the man you were. No, Caleb agreed. I am not. After Tonto left, Caleb and Kaya sat in comfortable silence. "Are you happy?" Kaya asked. Caleb thought about the question. He still had nightmares sometimes. His hands still shook when he was tired. But he also had this: a home, a wife, a child coming, a purpose. "Yes," he said, "I think I am." "Good," Kaya said. She reached out and took his hand. "Because this is only the beginning. Our child will be born into a world we are building together." Below them, the valley lights flickered like earthbound stars. And in the distance, the sound of drums from the Apache camp mixed with the fiddle from a settler's cabin. Two rhythms, finding harmony. The future was uncertain. But on this porch, in this moment, with Kaya beside him and their child moving in her womb, Caleb Drummond allowed himself to believe. Maybe redemption was not about erasing the past. Maybe it was about having the courage to build something better in the present. And as the first star appeared in the darkening sky, he made a silent promise to his unborn child. "You will know both your mother's stories and your father's. You will walk in two worlds with pride, and you will never have to choose between them, because we will teach you that being both is not a weakness. It is the only way forward." The sun sank behind the mountains. The sky blazed orange and red. And in the gathering twilight, two figures sat side by side on their porch, both looking toward a future they would build together. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage at a time. The end.